And welcome to this ElaadNL Webtalk number 42. We do this one in English. My name is Erik van Kaathoven. I'm a communications manager at ElaadNL, and we are the Knowledge and Innovation Center on the smart and sustainable charging of electric vehicles. And we are an initiative of the joint Dutch grid operators. Today, our speaker is Lonneke Driessen of the Open Charge Alliance. Welcome, Lonneke. Her presentation is about the world of open standards in EV and the history of the Open Charge Point Protocol. This is a protocol that facilitates communication between charging station and back offices. And OCPP started very small in the Netherlands, but has become a worldwide standard. What lessons can we learn from the history of OCPP, and how can OCPP and other open standards support the future of EV charging? Presentation will be about 15 to 20 minutes, and after that we have a question and answers part. You can ask your questions in the question box. Please feel free to do so. Lonneke will try to answer as many questions as possible. Good to mention, this web talk is being recorded and will be available on YouTube later this afternoon. So let's start. Lonneke, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Erik. So welcome everybody, and thank you for taking the time to join us during this web talk. So my name is indeed Lonneke Driessen. I work with ElaadNL, and I'd like to tell you more about the OCPP, the Open Standards Protocol. So maybe next slide, please. So maybe some of you are familiar with the Open Charge Point Protocol, OCPP for short. But just for those of you who are new to the protocol, a brief introduction. It is the protocol that exchanges the information between charging stations out in the field and the charging station management system from which all the transactions are being handled. So it was developed by the industry in an incremental way. So every time the industry learned something that they wanted to add or improve, the Open Charge Point Protocol adopted it. It's very important to know that it's an open standard in the sense that it's freely available, it's freely downloadable, but it also does not include any license fees or any intellectual property. So you can use it for free, and you are not obliged to pay something to anybody. Oh, Martijn? Yeah, thank you. Please, can you go one slide back? Yeah, thank you. So OCPP is governed by the Open Charge Alliance, which is a non-profit organization which was founded in 2014. It's based in the Netherlands. And at the moment, we have 289 members, and I will share more about who they are and where they are from in a little bit later. So anybody is welcome to join the Open Charge Alliance. So what the Open Charge Alliance does is not only develop the protocol itself, but we also develop compliancy testing tools, and also a certification program where you can have an independent testing laboratory check your implementation for conformance to the specification. We do promotion of OCPP, and this web talk is one way of promoting OCPP. And we also organize Plugfest testing events where members of the industry, parties in the industry, can test their implementations. And as it happens, today we are hosting a Plugfest here in Arnhem. If you look behind me, you can see people, cars, charging stations, everybody's testing OCPP. Next slide, please. So this Plugfest, this is a picture of yesterday. So we organize these events 3 times a year. You can attend online or in person. So we can test either way. For many companies, it's a great opportunity that they can join a test event online, because it means that they don't have to travel. So if they don't have the funding or the time, or they would like to avoid airfare, so they can still join the event online, but it's also possible to attend in person, and that's really good to have the face-to-face engagement with your fellow OCPP enthusiasts. So for this edition, we are hosting this week. We have 110 test teams. So there are many parties who are testing OCPP for this edition. And it is very interesting to see that these 110 test teams come from 36 countries all over the planet. So we have participants from Ecuador, from Rwanda, from the Philippines, Switzerland, all over the world. At this moment, companies are testing their charging infrastructure for interoperability. We think that's great for everybody. Next slide, please. So OCPP started in 2009. The first 6 years of OCPP are displayed on this slide. So back in 2009, when ElaadNL started, ElaadNL is a Dutch, also non-profit organization, funded and founded by the Dutch grid operators. And they started back then setting up their own charging network. They wanted to use multiple vendors, and they asked for a standard information exchange protocol. And back in those days, there was no standard. So Elaad decided to just start writing an information exchange protocol for themselves. And they named it OCPP, Open Chargement Protocol. So the first version was released by Elaad in 2010 for OCPP 1.0. And with everything that we learned together with our partners, we implemented newer features, and that's why we published OCPP 2.1.5 in 2012. And the protocol was from the start freely available. It got a lot of traction, a lot of parties benefited from it, a lot of parties started contributing to it. So that's when Elaad thought it would be good to hand over the governance of this protocol away from Elaad and start a new, broader coalition, also a non-profit foundation, also based in the Netherlands, but co-founded with an American partner and with an Irish partner, and it was named the Open Charge Alliance. So the Open Charge Alliance from 2014 onwards has been responsible for OCPP. In 2015, OCPP 1.6 was published, and currently most charging stations around the world that operate with OCPP operate on this version 1.6, so it's very widely used today. Next slide, please. So the second 6 years, roughly from 2016 until now, what we realized was that with everything we were learning with this development EV charging industry, that at some point we needed to make a step change. We needed to make some fundamental changes to the protocol to take the whole development to the next level. And that's why we published a 2.0 version back in 2018. And after the first implementations in the field, we published OCPP 2.0.1 in 2020, and that is now the most recent version of OCPP that has all the features that we need today and in the near future. And that's the version that's also being tested here today during this Bugfest. Which brings us to 2022. I mentioned before that OCPP 1.6 is widely used. OCPP 2.0.1 is starting to be widely used. And where are we as an industry at this moment? I'd like to share that with you on the next slide, please. So I mentioned that the Open Charge Alliance is a member organization, so you can join. You don't have to join to use OCPP or the certification program or buy the test tool, but you can if you like and support the good cause. And at this moment, we have 289 members of OCA, and they originate from 45 different countries. So in this graph, you sort of see the numbers of participants per country. And what you can see that the number one representation of countries is the Republic of Korea. Most members of the Open Charge Alliance come from Korea. And that, of course, has to do with the fact that in Korea, OCPP is mandated if you would like to get government funding for charging infrastructure. So Korea is the number one country, followed by Germany, then the United States, the Netherlands. All in all, if you count Europe as one group, most participants come from Europe. But as you can see, we have also a very substantial participation in North America. And of course, there's also a reason for that. Also in North America, OCPP is now, for instance, in the state of California, required if you want to have government funding. So that's great news. But as I mentioned, you don't have to be an OCA member. You can use it if you're not a member. It's also fine. And in the next slide, I'd like to share with you yes, sorry, next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So You can use the OCPP. It's freely available on the internet. You can download it. And we do keep track of how many times the protocol is being downloaded and to which countries. And this graph is a really interesting long tail where you can see the downloads to all corners of the globe. And to date, OCPP has been downloaded more than 70,000 times to individual IP addresses from 145 countries. So that's really a lot. So not only in Korea or in Europe or in North America, parties are using OCPP, also in all the other countries that are moving forward with EV charging, they are downloading the protocol and hopefully they are using it or they are learning from it. They can benefit from all the expertise and functionality that's been included in OCPP. For us as an Open Charging Alliance, this is really important because the transition to zero emissions transportation is something that we need to do all together. It's not enough if certain countries in Europe move to zero emission transportation. We need everybody across the world to join in the on the road towards sustainable transportation. So we are really happy as the Open Charge Alliance that so many countries and regions of the world are being supported by the work that the Open Charge Alliance community is doing. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, at the legislative level, you see everywhere more and more legislation surrounding the transition to EVs. These are two examples. So in the European Union, in December 2020 already, there was a recommendation to use OCPP. And this summer, the Biden-Harris administration awarded a lot of funding, I think billions of dollars, to be invested in EV charging infrastructure. And they proposed to, as a prerequisite to get access to these funds, to also implement OCPP. So that is a great step, we think, forward from the current US government. And it's giving a real boost to the industry that they are really gathering and starting to adopt OCPP even more than they have done so far. Next slide, please. So now looking forward to the next 6 years. So what's up? What are we going to do regarding OCPP for the next 6 years? 6 years. So first of all, who can look into the future 6 years from now? But if we know at this moment what's on our horizon, a very important topic is grid integration. So this is a very nice but real life picture in the Netherlands. This is the electricity grid. And of course, if you want to charge all these vehicles, you need electric power. So you need an electricity grid to provide that power. So there is a huge task ahead for all utilities across the world to make sure that the grids are up and ready to provide all this needed electrical energy for transportation. But this is not an easy job. It will take a lot of work and a lot of investment. So anything we as an Open Charge Alliance can do to help utilities to better integrate the charging infrastructure to the grid, that's of course what we'll focus on. And this is the main topic of work for the coming years. Make sure that the connection between the charging infrastructure and the grid is as optimal as possible so that charging infrastructure can be rolled out, but also the grid can provide the much needed energy for those charging stations. Next slide, please. Another topic which is really important is the uptime. Of course, there are a lot of charging stations out in the field, and it's very important that they have as high an uptime as possible. And in some situations, charging stations do not always work 100% of the time. This is, of course, not good for EV adoption. So we want to improve that uptime. And OCPP can help with all the information OCPP can get from the charging station, help the teams that operate these charging stations to target their maintenance and know what they need to do. If there's an issue, what is it that they need to do to fix it? This picture is a really nice picture from a US-based company called Charger Help. And you can look them up online. It's really a great company, and they are there to make sure that every charging station that doesn't work, that is going to be functional as soon as possible. So this is something that's also very important for us to make sure that everything is out there and it works. So next slide, please. Another thing that's really important, it's very early days, but there is so much energy regarding this topic, and it's called bidirectional charging, which means that you not only charge your car, so you have energy to drive around, but if you have a surplus of energy in your car, you're not using it, you could also maybe push it back into the electricity grid for all sorts of purposes, either to trade, either to support the electricity grid. So the whole concept of bidirectional charging is very exciting. And we have been for the past few years, but also for the next years, we will make sure that OCPP is fully ready and supporting this new development in EV charging, bidirectional charging. Next slide, please. So to summarize, what is OCA and OCPP going to do for the next 6 years? Anything the global industry needs. So whether that's requirements coming from Korea or from India or from the European Commission, we listen to the market, we listen to legislators. We have been doing that all along, incrementally updating the protocol to match the development of the industry. And that's what we keep doing for the next 6 years. Okay, thank you. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
So thank you, Lonneke, for your presentation. It's to ask you a few questions. So a little bit more personal, but how did you get involved in this subject?
Oh, that's a good question. So I was working for a utility, a Dutch grid operator, Nexus, and my activities were in the field of smart metering. And smart metering was a very nice topic, and at a certain stage, it became like a mass rollout. And I was looking for something new, and I asked around, I talked to people, I looked around. So what is new? This was in 2015. What is the new thing for grid operators? And then I inevitably found the topic of EV charging. I thought, well, this is a really interesting development, being a grid operator. And of course, the first stop in the Netherlands where you go is Elaad. And then I met the team at Elaad, and they were so enthusiastic that I didn't have to think 1 second about it. And I started working for ElaadNL and on this particular topic of OCPP.
Okay, thank you. And what makes it interesting even all those years later for you?
What is really interesting that you see the industry change. When I started with OCPP, the Open Charge Alliance was very small. I think we were only 60 members, all enthusiasts, really small companies, startups, and this was a great atmosphere for development. And what we've seen over the past years is that the market is growing, companies are scaling up, different players enter into the market, but what they all share is this passion to help each other move forward and get these charging stations out there, and do that part for the decarbonization of transportation. Okay,
thank you. And so if you look at its challenges for the adoption of open standards, are those more technical or organizational, or both?
Well, there are a few challenges with open source standards, open source protocol. So the first thing I think I would like to point out is trust. So open source is something new. It's not something that was done a lot last century. So for many people, open source is a little bit unknown. So if open source standards or open source protocols are used, not everybody is fully aware of what it means. And sometimes they are a bit hesitant to go all in with an open source standard. This has not happened in Korea or in North America, where they have mandated it. So we really laud those technology advanced industries that they are trusting on open source standards and that they are moving forward with that. Another topic which is challenging, we've had some hardships there before, and it's something to keep alert about, is patents, intellectual property. In any emerging industry, there is this group of people and companies who think that they can gather intellectual property and then subsequently use that to their own advantage, which is of course totally opposite to the open source ideology. And this is something that any industry faces, but also the EV charging industry faces. And this is something that we think, our position as the Open Charge Alliance is that this is not good for anybody. It will distract from the actual goal that this industry needs to achieve, which is get good, affordable, reliant, secure infrastructure out there to make sure that everybody who wants to drive electrically can charge.
Okay, thank you. But a more technical issue with regard to your webcam, it's moving a little bit because because you're a little bit enthusiastic talking about this, which is great. So, and are there any technical challenges still ahead, or what are the main challenges on the technical side?
I think, well, I wouldn't call it the technical challenges, but what we are seeing in the industry, that the industry is not everybody is at the same level of development and the same level of technical requirement. So there are market parties or regions in the world that are perfectly happy with straightforward charging and subsequently are perfectly happy with older versions of OCPP. But at the same time, there's also a huge group at the same time that is looking for very sophisticated, very advanced EV charging. I mentioned the bidirectional to support the frequency of the grid. So those things are happening in parallel. So the industry, particularly charging station manufacturers, it's very difficult for them. They need to focus on all those markets. So they need to develop reliant chargers, cheap chargers. They have to develop additionally very sophisticated chargers. So there is a lot of technical development that needs to be done while they are scaling up and growing. So I think the EV charging industry as a whole is really stretched. And that is, of course, what we hope that the Open Charge Alliance can help with. By providing standard ways, we can take a little bit of their development burden away, and they can spend their energy efficiently and wisely.
Yeah, and that's also one of the advantages of using open standards, working together all around the world. Are there any other advantages you would like to put forward, open versus closed systems?
Yes, so I already talked about the fact that it's for free, so you don't have to worry about paying anybody to anything for anybody. The second advantage is sort of the shared development, so you can unload a bit of the development burden onto the whole group to socialize the development burden. But the final thing is, because it's a joint collaborative effort, you get a lot of different viewpoints. So you get a viewpoint from the payment industry, from the hardware manufacturing industry, from the OEM industry, from the utility industry. So by combining all these different viewpoints, you better understand what's needed. And a charging station, by definition, is something that connects all these worlds. A charging station is a physical representation of connecting the utility world, the transportation world, the payment sector, and those have not in the past been naturally connected. So that is something with everybody collaborating. The content, so what the protocol actually can provide, has a very broad view.
Yeah, does the second main advantage you mentioned, does this also mean that startup companies, small companies are also have a better chance versus all the big ones?
Well, the whole concept of open source is that, or open, is that if there are networks out there. So for instance, there is the network operator who has installed the backend system and already has 200,000 charging stations out in the field. When it's an open standard, it's very easy for a startup company with a new product, a different product, maybe a cheaper product, to go to that big network operator and say, I have something that I can plug into your network. So it is sort of a way for startup companies to join in. So it's for us a way to lower the entry barrier a little bit.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned it in your talk. At the start of OCPP was in the Netherlands, and so why is the Netherlands such a front runner in the world of open standards and EV charging?
That's a good question. I think that the Netherlands as a country was early with the adoption of electric vehicles. We were one of the first, not the first, but one of the first countries. So it was a great test bed for charging infrastructure. I think also the Netherlands have quite like a collaborative attitude. And thirdly, I think that Dutch people, don't want to be too general, but are very practical and down to earth. So when we have something, let's implement this, let's try it out and fix it later. So we don't have this mindset that we first should know everything before we want to move forward. So the whole idea that the main focus is to develop and to move forward, and of course learn as we go. I think that is maybe one of the reasons why it was initiated in the Netherlands.
Okay, thank you. Interesting subject. And so if we look at other innovations on the sustainable front, we see, for example, solar panels, heat pumps, home energy management systems. I guess there's some same kind of issues with regard to ICT communication. Can those learn from the experiences of EV charging in the communication area?
Yeah, I think what is important, if I understand your question correctly, what's important in what's similar to OCPP. OCPP is a connection between two industries, three industries, four industries. And I think this is exactly the same with the whole concept of energy management, where you are connecting the world of air conditioning to the world of solar panels, to the world of battery storage. And they are not necessarily always the same companies or the same people or the same countries for that matter. So what I think that they can learn, and they are doing this already, is make sure that you have a broad representation. So you have, if you want to develop an open source standard, you have people from all these types of industry who can bring in their knowledge to the table, explain what this is they need, and learn what it is that the other industry needs. And there you get this diverse discussion, and I think that is particularly in this topic is really important.
Okay, we are now live from the second day of the Open Charge Alliance Plugfest at ElaadNL in the Netherlands. So can you explore a little bit more about is this a great event? Is this an important event? How much time? How many times is it be holding?
So I think this is so this is I think the 16th Plugfest that we've organized. So as I mentioned, we organize these events 3 times a year. So the next one is scheduled for March. It is a great way to test, but it's also a great way for people to observe and to see, talk to the industry, and just get a feel of this whole exciting development of open source. There are all these enthusiastic developers trying to figure out why they are not connecting to each other and celebrating when they do. So I think it's an open invitation. As soon as we have a new Plugfest and you are interested in this field, feel free to drop by. We rotate across locations, but if it is in the neighborhood, you're more than welcome to join and have a look and see what's happening over here.
Yeah, and what do those 110 test teams, what do they get out of its testing rounds?
So a lot of different things. So first of all, they are developing their systems, and it is good for them to test it out with different parties. So the way it works here is you test with one party for 1.5 hours, and then you rotate. So you move to another group, and then you test with yet another partner. So it gives you an opportunity to work together with a lot of different partners to find all the bugs that are still in your implementation, but also to network and to socialize and maybe see future business opportunities. If there's a group that you like working with, you exchange ideas, and maybe there's an opportunity for future collaboration.
And you can do this online also?
No, yeah, okay. So the good thing about online participation is that it's less of a resource strain. But of course, being here in person, you get the personal factor. You can see people and discuss during the lunch and the dinner we always have, and during coffee breaks. So the human factor of a physical encounter is, of course, what you have when you join on site.
Okay, some incoming questions. For example, from Claire Voosman. Do you think that the trust in open source has changed recently? Is there any development? Is open source getting bigger, more trusted, or smaller?
Well, if I look at the participation, the companies that are joining, what we do see is that traditionally larger companies with their own implementations have now joined the Open Charge Alliance. So I can't, of course, speak for them, but it might signal that they realize that for scaling, and I think now the market is at the phase where we all need to scale, that for scaling, joining an open source standard is just really helpful because you can connect to everybody. You don't have to do all the development themselves. So I think that from the industry, there is more trust, maybe not open source altogether, but at least in OCPP. I think on the legislative front, there are differences. I think that certain regions in the world, and I mentioned the Netherlands, Korea, Romania, are all perfectly happy of mandating or requiring an open source standard. There are certain countries and certain which are still a bit hesitant and are not quite sure if it's safe for them to go all out on open source standards. But we're doing everything to prove them that we can do a good job and that the industry is really helped by open source.
Yeah, and an additional question from Claire Groosman is also looking back, what have been the most challenging impediments in the acceptance of OCPP over the years? What were the main challenges?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, because I'm such a devout believer in OCPP, I can't think of anything. But I think that there, what maybe a challenge has been and still is a little bit, that the people should realize that OCPP does not have everything, and it's not perfect. It just, the way it was developed is sort of agile development, which is you think of something, you build it, you test it, you build on top of it. So the whole agile development means that there is no endless roadmap with fixed features. And maybe for some people, they prefer to first see an entire plan with an all-encompassing approach and then execute that. So you could say that it's a bit of like the waterfall approach against the agile development. And of course, we try to explain to them OCPP is not perfect, it's not complete, but we'll keep improving. So it's not what you see now is not necessarily what you will be using in 6 years' time.
Yeah, and a rather basic question, but for those who are new to this business or to EV charging, why is it even necessary to have communication between the charging station and the back office?
It's not well, it's not really necessary, but if you, for instance, it is necessary if you want to remotely manage a charging station. So is it working? If it's not working, what are the error messages? Why is it not working? Or maybe if you want to update it, do a remote firmware upgrade instead of going there and opening the charging station and with a laptop connecting, stuff like that. So if you just, and particularly if you look at scaling, it's much easier to monitor everything from a remote location instead of going everywhere. So that's one reason. Another reason why you could benefit from having a connection is you have more methods of payment. So EV drivers can pay more easily in different ways. And of course, yeah, not everybody wants to pay in a similar way. And a third reason is, of course, you can, if you have a connection, you can control the charging speed according to the EV driver's requirements or the grid constraints or the prices in the energy market. So it's just you can just do much more. So it's not needed that every charging station is connected. What we do is that the charging stations that are connected, we make sure that everything works.
Yeah, and so there are also advantages for consumers if this works well.
Yes, definitely. So that's the whole idea that if you are an EV driver, you can have, for instance, one charging card that works everywhere. The whole roaming concept. OCPP does not address roaming, but it helps communicate the customer's information from the charging station to the back office to their service provider. So they, as what we have in the Netherlands have had for 7 years now, is that you have just one card and you can charge everywhere. That's really important for consumers.
Okay. Another question from Carlo Mol. What is the timeline related to bidirectional charging? What is expected from the OCPP point of view?
Yeah, so we have what we have inside the Open Charge Alliance. We have written the whole specification for bidirectional charging, and it's quite broad. So it's not just provide power back to the grid, but it's also using the vehicle to support grid frequency, to support voltage. So it's very advanced. So that's all done. It has been reviewed, of course. Certain parts have already been implemented in the field. This was really important because we got feedback from the industry saying that a field was missing or we needed to add something. So it has been tested out a little bit. And currently the planning is the beginning of next year to release it. So that would mean that there is a standard way of using OCPP to cover bidirectional charging. It's really important to say is that we have aligned it with the way Europeans work, but also North America and also Korea, because of course, as I mentioned, for OCPP, it's universal. So there's only one OCPP, and we need to make sure that it integrates with the grids globally. So to answer Mr. Mol's question, beginning of next year, it will be published. If you're an OCM member, you can already see the drafts. If you're not an OCM member, then the final version will be published and made available on the website at the beginning of next year.
Okay, and will this also be a huge push for bidirectional charging, vehicle to grid and other options?
I think that bidirectional charging there is already a lot of buzz. I think a lot of companies are trying it out. So I think the development for bidirectional charging doesn't really need OCPP. Where OCPP will help this development is scaling up. So if we really want to roll out bidirectional charging, if you want to go to scale, then it's just much easier for everybody to use one standard way of communicating.
Okay, another one coming in from Matthijs van der Wiel. Is OCPP's functionality restricted to communication between car and EVSE? I guess that's the back office. Does the OCPP contribute to securely transmitting measurement results from the EVSE to the customer?
So OCPP is between the charging station and the charging station management system. So if the charging station management system forwards the data to the customer, in that sense, yes. But OCPP does not describe a direct communication between a charging station and a customer.
And are there other open protocols for this kind of communication?
I think that depends per service provider. So they have usually apps that you can then communicate with your smartphone. But this is not my focus.
So let's do one last question. Also looking at the clock. So you can get back to the Plugfest and all the testing happening. What would the world of EV charging look like with regards to communication and open standards in 5 or 10 years time? So if you're looking ahead, what's your opinion?
I think that looking at the speed of the industry all across the world, I think that, for instance, we see now the first people here at the Plugfest coming from Africa. Recently, businesses from South America have joined. So I think that if you look 5 years ahead from now, possibly in certain regions of the world, there will be the sophisticated charging with bidirectional grid support and all this more advanced vehicle-to-grid integration. But I do think that at the same time, on other parts, just charging, basic charging, is more than sufficient to accommodate all the EV drivers in that region. And I think what is also going to be more prominent in the next 5 years than it is now is, of course, the whole heavy duty megawatt charging and all the support that you need there. And there's also a huge transformation going on in Southeast Asia, where they have a lot of bicycles and tricycles, much more than passenger vehicles. So that is also a whole development that we may not see so much, for instance, in the Netherlands, but in other regions of the world, electrification of that modality of transport is going to be hopefully using a lot of OCPP in 5 years' time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time and for your presentation, Lonneke. Thanks all attendees. Our next web talk will be in 2 weeks' time on the 24th of November by Jeroen Haterink and Edwin Witvoet of Jive Company. And they will talk about a new innovative model to arrange the EV charging business. This web talk will be held also in English language. And this web talk will be soon available on YouTube. Thanks again, everyone. Hope to see you next time on the 24th of November. Same place, same time. Bye.
Bye.